Hello, government students. We talked in our last video about the state and the theories on why states came into being, and we discussed the force theory on the creation of the states. We discussed the evolutionary theory and the divine right theory. And then the fourth theory on the creation of the state is the social contract theory. And I want to spend a little more time on the social contract. The social contract theory developed in the period of European Western history called the Enlightenment, which is really primarily in the 17th century into the 18th century. And the first person to really espouse the idea of the social contract, at least in a widespread way, is a philosopher from England by the name of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes wrote a great book called the Leviathan, and in the Leviathan Thomas Hobbes talks about the purpose of the state. Now, when Hobbes wrote the Leviathan, this was during the period of the English Civil War. The British King Charles I had been overthrown in a rather bloody civil war. Charles had his head chopped off, and then there was a period of about 10 years when England did not have a monarch. And Thomas Hobbes felt that this period of time when England was without a monarch was a time of great chaos and anarchy, and he was really rather horrified by what was going on in England. He felt that a strong monarchy was necessary to maintain order. And he has a famous quote in Leviathan, and his quote is this, that life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And basically what he's saying is the state of nature is the condition of man when there is no strong government, no strong state to maintain order. If you do not have a state, if you do not have a functional government within that state, you'll be living in the state of nature, and to Hobbes that meant you'll be living in anarchy. And in a situation in anarchy, who rules? It's the strongest people who will have the ability to force their will on weaker people. So you need a state to prevent that kind of lawlessness, that kind of anarchy. And so the state, according to Hobbes, is created to protect us from the state of nature, to give law and order and protection for people. And people come together to create the state in order to maintain that sense of security. Okay, so think of it as a contract. All the people in a given area are going to give up some of their rights, and in return, giving up rights to a governmental entity, in return they have protection from anarchy and lawlessness. That's the social contract, according to Thomas Hobbes. A later philosopher came along a generation or two after Hobbes, and he refines this idea of the social contract, and that man is John Locke, who lives in the late 1600s. And John Locke says that the state is created more than just to prevent anarchy, but to protect your life, liberty, and property. That's the function of the state, is people get together and form an agreement to create a government in order to protect their life, their liberty, and their property. Now, Locke's views are a little bit different than Hobbes, because Locke throws in that idea of the protection of liberty. Thomas Hobbes seems not to have quite so much concern for freedom or liberty, that is individual freedom and liberty, as Locke does. So for Locke, that sort of is a way to enrich the purpose of the social contract. And then about 100 years or so after Locke, you have who I think is more the conclusion of the social contract theory, and this is from a Frenchman by the name of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the state is created to enforce the general will of the populace. Okay, this idea of the general will. And you can see that could be interpreted as a form of democracy. Okay, so we have a state, we have a government that is given power within the state, whose purpose is to make sure that the general will of the people is honored. Okay, so you can see how this is an idea of social contract, that the people are gathering together, providing a government of their own free will in order to ensure that the general will of the people is honored. Now, an interesting thing about Rousseau. Rousseau's ideas have been used by very evil and scrupulous people as a means to justify some of the most horrible acts that have occurred in human history, to justify acts of genocide and other criminal type acts. So for example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau lived in the time of the French Revolution. So if the state and its government are created to enforce the general will of the population, well, what if the general will is that all aristocrats in France have no right to live and should be executed? And so in the French Revolution, you did have a period called the Terror, in which a large number of aristocratic people, as well as some non-aristocrats who were concerned about the direction the French Revolution was going, were rounded up and sent to the guillotine and had they were executed with their heads being chopped off at the guillotine. If that's the general will of the people, maybe that's justified. So, we would not necessarily believe that's the case. Later on, some might say, well, what if the general will of the people is that Jewish people have no right to live? And that could be used to justify the annihilation and the extermination of the Jews during the period of the Third Reich in Germany. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau's ideas, while I believe are honorable, have sometimes been misconstrued in very evil ways to justify some of the most terrible acts in human history, although I'm sure that Rousseau himself would have been horrified to see that his writings were used to justify that. But one interesting thing on that is that if the general will is something that is bad, we have put into our government, our Constitution, protections against that within our own country's Bill of Rights and other aspects of our Constitution, which grant individual freedoms, which, if the general will of the people is to take some freedoms away, we have some protections written into our laws. So basically, though, to summarize the social contract, states are created by the consent of the people to prevent anarchy and to promote the well-being of the population. And I like this final quote that I'm going to give you, which I think summarizes the social contract quite well. And this might be something that you're familiar with. The very first words of the Constitution, I think, are a great summary of the social contract. And in those first words of the Constitution, which we call the Preamble, it states that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So what is the purpose of government? Well, it's when the people come together in order to form a union, a more perfect union. And then you notice there's the three dots in there. I've skipped over some of the wording of the Constitution. But basically, it's saying that we, the people, have come into agreement to form this union. And how do we do it? We do it through the establishment of justice and various other things which are stated in the Constitution. But really, this preamble of our Constitution, I think, is an excellent summarization of the social contract, in that it is formed by the people, and it is formed in order to establish a perfect union, which it will include justice and protection and all those things that men like Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau were concerned with. And with that, we're going to stop our discussion of the social contract. And be sure to check Canvas to see if there's any assignments or anything you need to address. Have a great day.